There can be few other places on Earth we'd rather find ourselves when presented with a collection of frontline supercars, a mission to find out which is the quickest against the clock, and a couple of days on which to establish just that. Welcome to Anglesey, specifically to the Coastal Circuit, which we believe to be one of the best tracks anywhere in the UK for comparing cars such as these. Our lineup is pretty mouth-watering and is nothing if not disparate in its range of content. At the bottom of the tree, financially at least, is the 100 grand Lotus Exige Cup 430 Type 25. One of the most radical versions yet on a theme pioneered by the humble Elise way back in 1996. Next up from this is the mighty Mercedes-Amg Gt with 577 bhp, a mostly carbon fibre body shell and a price tag of 150 grand to match. And then there are the two big fellas, the new 700 horsepower 911 Gt2 Rs and the already well-established 216 mph Ford GT. The GT2 is the newest and most powerful car of the quartet, while the Lotus is the cheapest and least potent, but also the lightest at a whisker under 1100 kilograms. The Ford, as you'll know, is essentially a Le Mans racer for the road, with a carbon fibre tub at its core and an aerodynamic package that should provide it with immense grip here, even if the relatively tight and twisty confines of the Coastal Circuit might not be its perfect hunting ground. The AMG, much like the other three to be fair, is also a thinly disguised racing car that's been legalised for road use. Despite being made mostly from carbon fibre, the twin-turbo V8 AMG is the heaviest car here by over 100 kilograms. But as we've discovered in the past, it's a dark horse, the GTR, especially when there are stopwatches involved. It's the one we drive first. In the search for equality, all four cars were fitted with Michelin Pilot Sport Cup 2 tyres, by the way.
In a way, the Amg Gt Rs is a bit of a misfit in this group because obviously it's the only one that's front-engined and rear drive, which makes it fundamentally feel very different from the mid and rear-engine cars, but it's so focused, this thing. It feels completely like any other version of the Mercedes GT. It's just, the moment you get in it, the moment you start to move in it, you can feel just how serious it is. The suspension movement is just super firm but beautifully controlled. The steering feels pretty much like a competition car steering. Very, very precise. And just loads of feel through the rim as well. It's a bit down on horsepower compared with the GT2 and the GT, Ford GT. 577 bhp from a 4-litre twin-turbo V8. But I don't know, the Amg Gt R is just one of these cars that seems to over-deliver on the sum of its parts. It stops and feels more agile than the weight of 1,600 plus kilograms suggests that it should. It feels faster in a straight line than you think it would with quote-unquote only 577 horsepower. Its gearbox, obviously it's a dual clutch, but it just works so beautifully, so quickly. And then, in the GTR's case, you've got this fabulously naughty button, which is a 10-stage traction control system. 10 stages, which means you can just dial it up or down to exactly the conditions. It's totally dry today, so I think I'm going to wind it pretty much all the way off. But it's a real trick, that. I love it. Okay, let's see just how quick the Amg GTR is. I think it's going to be pretty rapid.
As predicted, the AMG set a blisteringly quick benchmark lap time. But next up was the Lotus. Could its lack of weight counter its lack of horsepower beside the others?
The Lotus is definitely the minnow in this group. I mean, all right, it costs £100,000, very nearly, which is an awful lot of money for a car that started life in 1996 as the Lotus Exige. But this has come an awful long way since then. Is it a Toyota engine? Not really, that's not fair. 6-speed manual gearbox, which is actually really quite nice around here, because this nudgy bit up at the top, I mean, Pdk gearboxes, dual clutch gearboxes are lovely, but there's still something quite nice about heeling and towing off for a downshift and having that much control and knowing that if you get it wrong, it's totally your fault. Anyway, the Lotus makes a fabulous noise, as you can hear. It also just feels what it is, so much lighter, smaller and more nimble than the others, and yet because it's on exactly the same tyres, it's Gt2 tyres, it's got outrageous amounts of grip. So even though it's got a massive amount of horsepower for a little car like this, which weighs just a smidgen over a tonne, it actually feels like it could do with more poke. That's how much grip it's got. Steering, absolutely no power steering, so it loads up mid-corner quite heavily actually. It feels a little bit cumbersome, the steering, when it's really loaded up in a corner like that. It's properly quick though, the Lotus. I think it's going to do quite a naughty lap time around here, even though it's hugely the underdog of this group. The other thing is, it just stops brilliantly, and that's the lack of weight. When you've got 300, 400, 600 kilograms in the case of the Lotus versus the Amg Gt difference, that makes so much difference in the stopping zones. You can just pile up to things, pile up to corners in the Lotus and just stamp on the brakes at the last minute and turn in, and it just goes where you want it to. Okay, time to put the crash helmet on and get the stopwatch out.
Was the answer to that, and in the end it was the Exige's less than brilliant gearbox and its outright lack of straight line muscle that saw it get beaten by the AMG by such a clear margin. So then it was time to swallow a brave pill and see how quick the Ford GT would go round Anglesey.
It just feels like such a serious car the moment you climb into it, the Ford GT. I mean, the interior is not the most beautiful or exotic place in which to find yourself among the supercar elite, but it is totally functional. It's really noisy as well on the move, not just from the motor and the exhaust. The suspension is noisy too. These huge Gt2 tyres just pick up any little bits of grain and fire them into the wheel arches, as you can probably hear. And it just feels exactly like what it is, which is basically a Le Mans car with a set of number plates on it and a slightly civilised interior. As a result, it just feels totally at home the moment you take to the track. Perhaps not at its absolute best on this track at Anglesey, because the Ford GT has all sorts of qualities as a kind of road-going racer, but you know, it's really quick, 647 horsepower, it stops beautifully, it's light, it changes gear brilliantly, but the thing that probably defines it more than anything else is its aero. It's got some proper aerodynamic grip, this car, and unfortunately there are only a couple of corners where that really comes into its own at Anglesey, and the rest of them, it actually feels a little bit too big for this circuit. I mean, it's got masses of grip, even in the slow stuff. You just need a bit more space in which to operate than you get here. So I'm not sure it's going to absolutely murder the lap time around here. It's going to be fast, of course it is, but just how fast, I don't know. But we are about to find out.
The GT felt just a bit too big for Anglesey. Its aero couldn't really get into its stride anywhere around the lap to make a big difference, and it lacked the agility of the AMG through the tighter sections, which is why it lost out to the GTR overall. Final question then, would the Gt2 Rs also prove too much of a handful to beat the AMG's time, or would it just blitz the lot of them around Anglesey?
It's a proper monster of a car, the Gt2 Rs. I mean, you just look at it from 100 yards away, but ideally from about 10 yards away, and it's just scary. It's got so many slats and holes that you can cut yourself on. And actually, it doesn't feel like that from behind the wheel. It just, you know, it feels like a regular 911, to be quite honest, until you go like that. And then your whole world just sort of starts to disappear out of the back of your head. 700 horsepower this car has got, and it puts all of that, as I'm sure you know, through the rear wheels. So it's a bit lively when you put your foot down. It weighs less than 1,500 kilograms, this car as well. Just bear that in mind. 700 horsepower, less than 1,500 kilograms. It's all getting a bit potty in the land of the fast 911. But you know what? You look at the numbers on paper and you think, well, that is just going to be an utter madman of a car, no question. And then you start to drive it, and then you think, well, do you know what? Somehow the magicians at Porsche have managed to produce a car that is insanely fast, yes, but it's also quite friendly. You need some temperature in the front tyres for sure, but once you have got some temperature in the front tyres, you can do that kind of stuff in it without really requiring much skill. You just need a bit of confidence that it's not just going to turn right round. Obviously that is not the quickest way to drive it, and obviously the Gt2 RS is phenomenally quick. The best way to get the best out of it though is actually to calm down and just use the grip it has, manage the slight amount of understeer that it suffers from. Mind you, when you get proper heat into the Cut 2 tyres at the front of this thing, it's kind of stuck at the front and stuck at the back as well. But it's all about how soon you can get on the power and how much of its power you can use. And then once you've got that bit sussed, to do the seat belts up a bit, turn in at some outrageous speed that you think is never going to work, and it just sticks. There's none of this old 911 movement of weight at the back. It just feels planted. And then you come to a braking area and everything changes again, because it just stops on a sixpence, this car. It really does. Then there's the Pdk Gearbox, which is utterly brilliant. Then there's the way it sounds. This is second gear. I mean, for heaven's sake. And then you can do this sort of stuff in it. Just brilliant. Just brilliant. All the Porsche GTs. I think, personally, I prefer the GT3 overall, because this thing is such a lunatic. But there is no question that this thing is going to be faster than a GT3 around here. So I guess it's time to put the lid on, get the stopwatch out, and find out.
And so there's your answer. The Gt2 tore its way around the coastal circuit in just 1 minute, 12 seconds dead, even managing to beat the time we set in a 918 Spider on this same track in the process. So it was a conclusive victory for the Porsche, a surprisingly strong showing from the AMG, a decent effort by the Lotus, and maybe a circuit to move on from and forget about for the Ford GT. Some car is the Gt2 RS, be that at the Nürburgring, at Anglesey, or pretty much anywhere really. So cheers for watching, and thank you to everyone at Anglesey and all the manufacturers involved for their support in making this film.